Are the mics okay? He's not responding.
This is bigger than Bush. This is the police state, but we want change.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
Your world is not what it seems. Alex answering. Outside the box.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is July 31st, 2011. I'm your host, Alex Answering. Tonight on Outside the Box TV, we have a very special guest. It's actually been several years since Zaher Wahab. How do you say your first name again?
Zahir.
Zaher? And you would think I would know that by now.
No, you pronounced it correctly. You do very well.
I want to thank you for coming on tonight. And for those just joining us, we're going to be discussing Afghanistan tonight. And so, Zaher, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me,
and
Alex.
kind of give
it's good to be with you.
An overview of some of the things that we'll be discussing tonight. I understand that you go to Afghanistan every couple months or so about
once a year. Once a year for about a semester, beginning in 2002. Well, I think there are many issues to talk about. First, there is the U.S. Attack and invasion and occupation. You know, because the country had nothing to do with 9/11, really. And then we can talk about the current government crisis, the financial crisis, people's living conditions, how this past year has been the bloodiest since the war began in 2001, 2001, and talk about the people, the poverty, the degradation, the violence, the insecurity, you know, the lawlessness, the crime and criminality. So we can talk about Afghanistan sort of being shredded right on live camera.
And the reason that I am bringing up Afghanistan for a full show tonight instead of going through all the news is that a lot of people are focused on the news, the debt ceiling, this issue and that issue. But I really don't feel, Zaher, that most people understand Afghanistan and understand the proper context. So hopefully tonight we can go over some basics about this country that of course has been in the newspapers just about every day for the last 10 years, even although things have been going on in Afghanistan for a very long time.
Every day, yes, but especially the last 10 years. You know, last year the Pew Research Center did a study. The mainstream media allocates about 3% of the space and time to the war in Afghanistan. And this is a war where the United States has at least 100,000 troops. Altogether there are about 130,000 troops now. And then there's one contractor for every one of these troops. There are 46 countries, troops from 46 countries waging war on this poorest and least developed country in the world. The U.S. alone is spending about $10 billion a month. So far, we have spent $500 billion on this war since 2001. And the current budget, this year's budget for the war is about $120 billion. So, and about 2,000 Americans have been killed, 15,000 wounded, and tens of thousands of Afghans have been killed and maimed. And yet there's very little coverage of it. And most Americans seem to be unaware of it.
Well, what it is, and I will speak for myself, it is hard to read about these reports, including ones about NATO troops murdering Afghan civilians, because personally for me it's traumatizing. I do feel that I live in a racist country that allows these things to take place, and I feel that for people watching that are very consumed by debates about health care and things that are very domestic, if you live in a country engaged in genocide, it's likely they don't care about our health care and there's something else completely in the works. So where would you like to start with in terms of all this?
Well, people have a legitimate concern, Alex, to be concerned here too about health, about education, about our parks, you know, about the budget crisis, the fiscal crisis. But there's a connection to be made between the economic crisis in America and the crisis in Afghanistan. So there's a direct connection because a study came out from Brown University, and it's a very powerful, very compelling study. And they're saying that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the total direct and indirect costs amount to about $4 trillion.
Right.
For this country. So that is a lot of money. And so Americans do need to be concerned, but Americans also need to think about, you know, that the Afghans don't deserve this. You know, they don't deserve the death and destruction and the war and violence that is being imposed on them. But from the Afghan side, you know, people now put these things together. You talked about racism and so forth. I would say people would now say that the West is now waging war on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya. 6 countries, soon perhaps to be Iran too. So other people, and thoughtful Americans too, put these things together. So I think we're not only talking about white supremacy and racism and how the wars, these imperial wars are the external face of white supremacy, but also people talk about Islamophobia. It's not a coincidence that the West is now waging active war on 6 countries who happen to be Muslim, but also which happen to have resources, energy resources.
There are, I must say, there are people in the conspiracy world, people that have, say, exposed the real truth about 9/11, or have asked questions if we've been told the truth by our government about 9/11, things we all ought to be doing. And I've seen them also play into that game, using these buzzwords, Sharia law, the Islamic March on America. And a lot of people, I think what it is they intuitively know that one day this economy is going to crash and this country is going to be in some trouble. And I think people know that.
I think it's happening already.
It's happening, but it hasn't yet gotten to what it could be one day, where all this is kind of a memory. And they're using that, maybe knowing that we have, and kind of replacing it with these words, kind of making the situation even more confusing for the layman.
So the ruling class in this society is looking for scapegoats. That's what you're saying. Because we're in big trouble here. I mean, I think this society is in deep trouble, and not just economically, I would say, the culture, the institutions, you know, street life, etc. We are in big trouble. But the thing to do is, I think, to go back to 9/11, and that is because many people, Americans, think that they can't tell the difference between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And I want to make it very, very clear, and this is now declassified materials coming out of the State Department, that Afghanistan as such had nothing to do with 9/11. 9/11, as you well know, was, you know, launched by 19 Arabs, 17 of them from Saudi Arabia, and 3, I think, from Yemen and other places. And we also need to remind our viewers that Al-Qaeda, in a sense, is a product of the CIA and the ISI and the Mukhabarat in Saudi Arabia. These 3 governments, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and the United States, put Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and the Mujahideen, the earlier generation, together.
And now it's well known
to fight the
ISI played a huge
USSR.
role in this.
Yes.
Which is interesting about the capture of Osama, by the way, because it happened very close to some ISI facilities.
Yes.
How would that have happened? And then also, by the way, they said Osama had a Pentagon-style level stealth helicopter. That was one little headline I saw, and I'm thinking, how would he have a stealth helicopter?
Right. The point is that, you know, that Al-Qaeda was in fact in conflict with the Taliban at the time. In just around 2001, before October 2001, there was actually a very serious conflict between the Taliban and the Qaeda, and my information is that the Qaeda, especially bin Laden, was under house arrest in Kandahar. What I'm trying to say is that to invade and attack Afghanistan was illegal, and it was wrong to begin with. And then to occupy a country for something that it had nothing to do with, you know, is clearly a violation of international law, and it's a sort of a brutal act of brutality. And so if the United States wanted to deal with, if this is a war on terror, then you know, terrorism is not, it's not a country, it's not a government, it's not a group. It's a phenomenon, it's a tactic, it's a strategy, and there are no Afghans. I mean, no Afghan has been involved in any of the attacks on the West, which is important, I think, to remind people. So why punish this whole country, which had nothing to do? with the 9/11 or the subsequent
Well, I
developments
think
and
it's
attacks.
probably safe to say that less than 5% of the people watching this show right now believe anyone from Afghanistan was involved in 9/11. In fact, well over 95% believe probably our own government, which saves us lots of time. So let's look at some of the factors that probably got them motivated to target Afghanistan. There's a few popular ones. One of them is heroin cultivation.
Yes.
The other one I read about was lithium, the use of mined lithium for cell phones.
And
There's
uranium.
Uranium.
But the more important thing, I think, is, I mean, many people have observed, including very thoughtful Americans, that the attack on Afghanistan and its occupation really has very little to do with fighting terrorism, that it has everything to do with oil and gas in this part of the world.
And Michael
the
Rupert has
Caspian
talked
Sea.
extensively about that, the plans. Well, Karzai, of course.
Yes,
was
well, worked
involved
for
in-
the UNOCAL,
okay.
you know, President Karzai, and he still may be a consultant to UNOCAL. But also, you know, when President Clinton was president, the United States and the Taliban government came this close to actually establishing diplomatic relations. UNOCAL at the time was actively pursuing, I know they trained people actually, they wanted to build this pipeline from Turkmenistan to Dawlatabad here through western Afghanistan to this port here.
Okay.
So I would say that, but there are other reasons. So I would say that, you know, one reason that we're not told why the United States and 46 other countries are in Afghanistan is the oil and gas in Central Asia, but also the oil and gas in Afghanistan. But furthermore, Afghanistan is very rich in other minerals like lithium, copper, uranium, gold, you know, coal, etc. I mean, this is a very, very rich country. But also the passage of the pipeline from the Caspian Sea through western Afghanistan to the Arabian Ocean. That contract has already been signed, and the Asian Development Bank is going to be funding it. It's called TAPI, the TAPI airline, TA airline, the TAPI
I think this is a note we may want to take, this Asian Development Fund, because we are seeing this rise of Asia and their influence growing, and not only in the Middle East, but Africa as well.
Well, yes, but I think the point is that the United States government, since the Clinton administration, has been very interested in building these pipelines to access and also to establish sort of control and hegemony in that part of the world, to deny access to China, Russia, India, Iran, and other people. So the main reason for the U.S. presence, and they're insisting on maintaining permanent air bases in 4 places, in Herat here, in Mazar-e-Sharif, in Jalalabad, and in Bagram. These 4 air bases
4
have
main
been
large
ones.
air bases.
They're expanding them, you know, and there's every indication that they're planning for a permanent stay. But also, as we speak, Washington and Kabul are actually negotiating a long-term strategic pact.
One thing that I've noticed in the news, after many of these announcements from our current president, which is not so different than the last, we've seen these announcements about troop reductions, and shortly afterwards, some sort of a suicide bombing, where there's lots dead, many dead. And we're also seeing this in Iraq. Shortly after these announcements, we're going to pull troops back. All of a sudden now Al-Qaeda's upset and doesn't want us to leave. So who benefits from these villages being bombed and these shopping places, these bazaars being bombed?
Well, that's questionable because, again, you know, the idea with this goes back actually, the U.S. invasion and occupation of Afghanistan goes back to the Project for the New American Century, which we know was planned in the very early 90s, where soon after the dissolution of the former Soviet Union, you know, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Khalilzad, you know, Douglas Feith, etc., these people, you know, planned to sort of control, especially the Gulf states in the Middle East and Central Asia, because they saw no deterrence. And so you probably are aware of this, that in fact before the attack on Afghanistan was launched, there was a serious debate in Washington to decide whether to attack Afghanistan or Iraq first. And then they said, let's do Afghanistan first because it's going to be easy, and then we'll move on to Iraq, which is exactly what happened. Except that they didn't know that the Afghans would simply not accept being occupied and subjugated. And so the war is being lost right now.